Hey, good evening everybody, or afternoon, and welcome to my rent party. I want to thank each and every one of you for being so gracious and helping me out in my hour of need. I truly appreciate it. But we're in Old Town here to kind of talk a little history and survey some of the damage that's going on down here. We're kind of coming up to where I always started my walking tour. And sadly it looks like most everything is shut down. Just kind of surveilling the damage coming up here on the old Merchant Hotel, taking us back to 1885. And sadly it looks like every business in the hotel. At one point there were 30 businesses working out of that hotel. And sadly, looks like none of them are working now, or very few. Even the Japanese museum is shut down. An Old Town Pizza on the corner, the side block there is shut down. A lot of people don't know Old Town Pizza was really downtown Portland's first pizza parlor, but even more people don't realize that that was our first real meeting place for social change in Portland. That was where a lot of social types in the early 70s got together to march against racism. So that kind of takes us way back. Folks like Bill Walton and his ilk would join there to kind of create their strategies for marching on Portland, which we're kind of back to now again. As I said, sadly, almost everything on this block is shut down. Looks like the Subway. Of course, the Subway sandwich shop is still open. That's even more sad. The only thing that stayed in business was the Subway. But when we get to the other corner up here, we're gonna get up to Erickson's Saloon. Now, 2nd Avenue, where we're walking right now, is one of our first major thoroughfares. This is where you came to see and be seen in Portland. But wow, doesn't it look hoppin' now? Looks like the Oregon Leather Company stayed in business. That's kind of cool. And looks like the only thing on the Erickson Saloon block that's still open is the Dixie. That's also kind of sad. The only business on the block. You know, I can't really tell if Spice Gentlemen's Club is still open, but of course that was home of our premier jazz club for many years. And upstairs there would have been the La Patisserie, which was one of the most beautiful little pastry shops in town. But Erickson Saloon was a major destination point for Portlanders. Many of the reasons people ever came to Portland was because of Erickson Saloon, and it took up half of this block, and it boasted the largest bar on the West Coast. It is said that if you totaled up all the bar space for Erickson's, it amounted to almost 700 feet of bar. That is a ton of bar. And if we kind of look behind here, you can see the U.S. Bancorp building looming behind it there. The building that Portlanders affectionately call Big Pink. Big Pink isn't quite 600 feet tall. So if you took that skyscraper and added another 100 feet to it, that's how much drinking was going on across the street at Erickson's. It was a major location for people to come to. And they rented rooms in there. Of course, there's a lot of prostitution happening on the 3rd floor up there. You could rent rooms in there. You can rent a room for a month, a week, or 10 minutes. Yes, you could get a 10-minute room in case you needed, I don't know, a nap or something. But Erickson's Of course, many years later, it just couldn't. Of course, when Prohibition came along, it became pretty difficult for them to sell 700 feet worth of coffee, and we kind of started selling off Erickson's saloons in bits and pieces. And now, well, up until about 6 months ago, there were numerous businesses working out of Erickson's saloon, and now we're kind of back to it being a big, old, empty business. A lot of really awful people hung out. One thing a lot of people don't realize about Portland is that before we paved these streets, everything here would have been made out of mud. And it rains a lot in Portland. So Portland had an sorry, I'm just running into too many people. It had an unearthly stench to it. People always talked about Portland as being one of the stinkiest places to be. And we're kind of walking towards the waterfront here. And of course, Jones is closed. Nikki, who ran the boiler room, lost that in a terrible situation with the landlords and not renewing leases, was eventually took over this bar over here, and now she sadly had to close that down as well. And now pretty much the residents of the area are just a lot of homeless camps. But a lot of people don't realize also about Portland is that times have been worse than this. At the turn of the century, it was estimated that almost half of our population were transient. Can you imagine that? Half the population. And all guys. Back then, it was said that men outnumbered women in this town 15 to 1. That's a lot of guys. And where are these guys coming from? Well, this is a port city, hence the name Portland. And many of these guys, the most dangerous thing you could be is to be on a boat. There's so many ways you could die on a boat. And so when they finally got into Portland, well, most of them would jump off the boat, hoping they'd never have to get back inside. And hence, this is where all of our guys are coming from. And most of these guys don't have a penny to their name. They just jumped off the boat with the clothes that they had on and started wandering around this downtown area of Portland looking for work or handouts or any way they could get a beer. And because the ship's captains had to sail the boats at full crew, well, hence we got a big problem in Portland. We're gonna have a kind of hip-hop soundtrack to this right now as we go by this blasting car here. But hence where we get the whole notion of Shanghaiing in Portland. And for the most part, these stories are really blown up. They're in most part very fabricated. You know, of course, you get the story. You know, well, they're gonna overserve the guy at the bar. They're gonna slip him a Mickey. He's gonna sit on a stool that's actually a trap door, and he's gonna drop down into the basements of Portland, and they're all connected by tunnels, and he's just gonna find himself back on that boat. But the reality of the situation was that in the situation, these guys were so desperate that really they would sign these contracts, these bogus contracts, for a little bit of cash, and the fine print on the contract just basically put them right back on the boat. And that's kind of the true story of Shanghaiing in Portland. It was all like these bogus contracts that these guys would get duped into signing. One thing about Portland is that because of tourism, we've pretty much taken the history of all coastal cities around Portland and jammed them into Portland. The bar with the trapdoor is actually in San Francisco, and so we've just kind of usurped everybody's mythology and jammed it all into Portland. And many still believe that every old bar in Portland, every third bar stool was a trapdoor, and it's really not the case. We get a little closer to the waterfront over here, we'll talk more about the real reason why we built the tunnels in Portland. But where we're standing now is what would have been Japantown, Nihonmachi. This 8-block area at its height housed 5,000 Japanese Americans. And these people thrived here for generations until, of course, 1942. Of course, World War II happens. We start fighting Japan, and the indictment comes down that we must intern all of our Japanese population to internment camps and send them away. And within 1 week, Nihonmachi went away. What was a Japanese hospital became a Caucasian hospital. What was a Japanese bakery became a Caucasian bakery. And within 1 week, Nihonmachi went away. And our history of racism in Portland and all of Oregon is immense. And I really don't, I could spend a whole video talking totally about the Japanese internment. But it was a sad, sad situation. These families were told that they could pack 1 suitcase per family. And then the Expo Center, which was at the time a livery, and they were all forced to stay in a horse stall, 1 per family, until they were all taken on trains to internment camps, which spread them as far away as Montana and Alaska. Many of these people, families were separated, many to never ever connect with their entire families again. And where we are now is the Japanese American Historical Plaza, which was built in 1990 as some small recompense to these citizens of Nihonmachi. Some things to point out here. There's a big pin stone here which has the names of all of the internment camps that these folk were taken to. And there are 2 berms across here. On this berm, we have writings on the stones, and all of the writings on the stones on this side of the park were taken from people that just got back from being interned, and only to find everything that they'd built to be completely usurped by others. And the writings on these stones are really strong. This one reads, "Going home, feeling cheated, gripping my daughter's hand, I tell her we're leaving without emotion." Many of these people found Portland to still be very inhospitable when they got back from the war, and so for the most part did not return to Portland as a home. And on this side of the berm is all writing from people the day they were taken from the park. This stone here reads, "Our young men and women joined the Army too. They are proud to be American." This is a pretty strong statement. But as I said, our history with racism in Portland is long and grand, and apparently not over yet. We sure wish it would come to an end. But on the other side of the park here is, of course, the mighty Willamette River, and that is how we pronounce the river's name, Willamette River, like damn it, the Willamette. And this river is deep enough for ocean-going vessels to bring their products 100 miles inland to Portland from the coast, which is basically the major reason why Portland is a city. But this river's really tamed down now. It used to be really rough and roiling back in the day before we dammed up parts of this river. And about every 60 years or so, this river will flood this town in a devastating way. And in 1894, we had our deepest, longest lasting flood in Portland. The flood we call the Great Flood of Portland. And that flood water filled Portland up to the first story of all of the businesses in the downtown area here. And because this area is kind of flat in Portland, you can only imagine how far that water would have traveled into town. And because our engineers at 1894 weren't all that good yet, it took them 2 months to get that water off of Portland. And of course, the water in the basements went bad and gave us great gifts like cholera and typhoid. So when we finally drained the basements, our engineer said, hey, you know what, Portland? We haven't really invented the pump yet. So what we need to do is to make sure water has a way out of these basements. We need to build little tunnel connectors which will connect the entire basement system together. So when Portland floods again, water will have a way out. And that is the real reason why we built tunnels in Portland. Nothing to do with Shanghaiing, everything to do with flooding. But back when this river was wild and roiling, Portland was a whole lot different. Portland's really two towns at the same time. On this side of the river, we were Portland. On that side of the river, we were East Portland. And East Portland and Portland didn't always get along. Different mayors, different police departments. And so my favorite story from this time period it deals with a woman by the name of Nancy Boggs, who ran a houseboat which sat in the middle of this river, right where this Burnside Bridge is now. Giant woman by the name of Nancy Boggs. Her brothel was named Nancy Boggs' Floating Palace of Sin. And she ran her business in the middle of the river because if Portland decided to get a wild hair and decide to shut her business down, well, all she had to do is lift anchor and move her business to the other side of the river. If East Portland decides to shut her down, well, again, she could lift anchor and move her business to this side of the river. So she's kind of playing this game, this dicey game of cat and mouse with these two police departments until one day the unbelievable happens and the police departments decide to cooperate. I'm going to send a tandem attack force team to hit her at both sides at the same time. But Nancy is prepared. When this happens, these police officers are greeted with the ladies on the houseboat opening up with hoses that are attached to the boilers on the houseboat, hitting the police with scalding hot water as they try to board her vessel, which sends all the police away in all directions, really hot under the collar. And they decide, okay, enough's enough with Nancy Boggs. Tonight we send somebody out there to cut her anchor. And that swift river is going to lift up that houseboat of hers and pull it downstream and out of this town. And that is exactly what ended up happening. They cut her anchor and Nancy goes on a screaming wild ride down the river. And that was kind of the end of Nancy Boggs running a brothel in the middle of the river here in Portland, Oregon. Now where we are at right now in Tom Mccall's Waterfront Park, when I was a little boy, used to be the freeway. That's right, this whole park used to be Harbor Drive. You can almost imagine it stretching out in front of us here, can't you? Harbor Drive. And back then Portland really wasn't the same town that we have today. There was one sidewalk at the river wall over here. You had to cross 6 lanes of traffic to get to it. And so almost nobody did, and almost nobody came to Portland back then unless they had to. But in 1974, the namesake of this Tom Mccall decided to do something about that and decided, well, why don't we just move that freeway to the other side of the river where there was almost nothing at the time and turn this entire riverfront area into a park. And it was probably one of the best decisions made, the structuring of Portland. It changed Portland dramatically for the better. What we're really missing here is, of course, Saturday Market, which probably would have been in full swing this time of the year last year. This time, Saturday Market is a great place where many shop owners would get together with their homemade goods and sell them here. If you were looking for anything that was made into tie-dye, your chances of finding it at Saturday Market were large. Same with myrtle wood. Anything made out of myrtle wood, you could find it here at Saturday Market. And of course, the elephant ear, one of the greatest pastries ever created. You can't go wrong with fried dough. But this is a fountain, and all of our fountains are off at this time of year. Normally they would be on. Portland has no trouble with water at all, generally, which generally blows my California friends' minds. Water fountains are just on all the time. Yeah, they are. But across the street from us begins the Yam Hill District, and the Yam Hill District's really well known for beer. Let's hear it for beer. Of course, I've been sober now for almost 10 years. But probably our most successful entrepreneur in Portland is a guy by the name of Henry Weinhardt. And Henry made beer. He made a lot of beer, and he started making it right across the street over here in the Yam Hill District. This Mercy Corps building on the corner over here is the site of Henry's first beer factory, taking us back to 1872. And he made a lot of beer. Of course, again, this whole area is deserted during the pandemic here. I'm gonna get us across the street here. I'm just gonna break the law. But on the other side of this little pavilion here is the Skidmore Fountain. And the Skidmore Fountain was really our first unofficial center square in Portland. I'm sure you can see it kind of there through the pillars as we're coming up here. And generally it's still always on, but today, no, none of the fountains are running. Good story about the Skidmore Fountain here is the night before they were going to unveil this fountain, Henry sent covert plumbers in the dead of night to burrow underneath the fountain and change the plumbing on the fountain so that when it got unveiled, it would be spewing Henry Weinhardt's beer. They got caught. Didn't end up. Always wondered if that would have been good for the town or really bad. Free running beer in the street. What could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? We're going to cross over here, and every single business in this area is shuttered down. Which is the saddest part of all of this. I'd expected to see a lot more damage to things, and there's more graffiti than normal, but the saddest part about it is that all of these businesses are shuttered down, all of them. Except for coming up here, it looks like the Oyster Bar is still open. The Oyster Bar is our oldest family-owned restaurant in town. Serving food since 1907, which I always thought was a good endorsement for their food. And if you can serve it for that long, it's got to be pretty good, and it is. Looks like that they've boarded up their windows and painted over them. It's really nice, actually. Sadly, though, you can't really look inside So if you did look inside, you'd notice that they really haven't done any decorating since 1907 in there. It is as it was. We're gonna kind of come up here into the Ankeny alleyway here. For years I tried to get people to refer to this as Donut Alley, and I've never heard that catch on yet, so I guess I'm not as influential as I thought I was. Shanghai Tunnel Bar here, which really should have been called the Shanghai Basement Bar, because not much tunnels. Again, we inflate these stories for the tourism of it all. Dan and Louise is known to be haunted by the owner. Many of our businesses in Portland are haunted by the owner of the business. The Benson Hotel is said to be haunted by Simon Benson. It can be found wandering the hallways and in the lobby on occasion. And so in Portland, you know, some bosses just can't move on. They just gotta stay working and working. But on Voodoo Donuts, Old Pal Trace still doing all right. Even without a crowd, the busking continues. We still got street performers trying. But here we are, nearly at the corner of 3rd and Burnside, which is for years been known as Skid Row. The Paris Theater here, where I did many plays back in the day. I've done Chekhov in that theater. The last story I'll leave you with deals with this hotel across from us here, which was at once the Multnomah Hotel, and history took place here because a guy with a real hipster name made some history here. A guy by the name of Silas Christopherson. How do you like that for a hipster name? Only in Portland. And Silas wants to make history by being the very first guy to fly from one state to another. Where does he want to do it? From the roof of this building. He wants to fly across the Columbia River and land in Vancouver, Washington, thus being the very first guy to fly from one state to another. And because most everybody on the planet had not seen an airplane fly at this point, thousands made long distance journeys to watch this event. We can imagine this whole area filled with onlookers looking to the top of the building. And to his credit, Silas does clear the building. But what do you think happens next? Yeah, that's right. Straight down he goes to about the first story, where he pulls out of it. He climbs and climbs and climbs and eventually lands in Battleground, Washington, thus becoming the very first guy to fly from one state to another. So, good job, Silas Christopherson. Unfortunately, that would be his only successful flight, as Yosemite National Park did not go quite so well for him the next month. Straight down. And that is the eventful and very exciting short story of one Silas Christopherson making some history right here on 3rd and Burnside. And with that, I would like to thank you all again for joining me for my little historical rent party here. And on my knees, I thank all of you. I'm not really going to get on my knees here. But metaphorically, on my knees, I am here to say thank you. Thank you for helping me out in my hour of need. All I can give you back is karma, and I hope that you take that and do well with it. I'll see you soon. If you haven't already, check out my Facebook page, Kevin Michael Moore, at my YouTube page at Kevin Michael Moore YouTube, and where I have tons of videos on there. And subscribe if you like, and if you don't, then just like the things. It's all right by me. But with that, peace out.